Hello, I'm Marcus Alton from the tribute website brianclough.com, and in this bonus edition of The Green Jumper we'll be looking back at when Brian Clough said farewell to football management.
The City of Nottingham paid me privileges, and I am absolutely delighted to have worked here for 18 odd years. I came here as a boy, and I watched my first test match at Trembridge, and I can't believe how good they've been to me. Now bear in mind, I don't live here.
Of his efforts, he's now being surrounded by not only photographers and policemen, but also supporters who are almost scrambling to get over the terracing there to get and touch their hero.
Emotional scenes at the City Ground there, described by the BBC's excellent commentator Martin Fisher. That day in May 1993, Clough's final home league match at the City Ground will live long in the memory. I was there to witness and be a part of the outpouring of love and admiration for the man who'd brought unprecedented success over 18 years at Forest, and before that transformed the fortunes of Derby County. 2 league titles, 2 European Cups, 4 League Cups and a host of other trophies, as Cloughie had taken on the big boys and rewritten history. Even though his Forest side was relegated by losing at home to Sheffield United, the fans wanted to show their appreciation of his loyalty and for making their dreams come true over nearly 2 decades. Even the United fans sang his name in tribute. One of the fans who joined Cloughie on the pitch after the match that day was Rich Fisher, who went on to be part of the small group of volunteers raising money for the Clough statue in Nottingham. These are his memories of that match on the 1st of May 1993.
Yeah, the build-up to that game, Forest, it was Forest's second to last game of that season, and if I remember rightly, they needed to win and have other results go their way to still be in with a chance of staying up. And so, it was a massive game, and then, as if it wasn't already a massive game, it was announced in the week running up to it that Brian Clough would be leaving Forest at the end of the season. The atmosphere was, I've never known anything like it before or since. The fact that Forest were potentially going to be relegated almost suddenly felt like an irrelevance. It was a sold-out crowd. It felt so much more like it was just an outpouring of emotion for people wanting to show Brian Clough what he meant to them. Obviously, he'd been at the club for over 18 years by this point. The match, it was a pretty poor Forest performance, which probably no surprise because Forest had been poor for the whole season, and they lost 2-0. And we're all stood there in the stadium knowing Forest were getting relegated, and yet all everybody was doing was singing Brian Clough's name, and it was a really weird, emotional day.
And did you try and get on the pitch at the end? Because there was a huge crowd, wasn't there, that surged onto the pitch and tried to surround Cloughie right at the end.
I did get on the pitch and actually I was probably one of the first 100 or so people on, actually, and I got quite near to him. I actually got a couple of really good photos. People used to always go, "Why have you brought your camera with you?" Which is funny when you think now that, people take photographs of absolutely everything. But yeah, I used to often take a camera with me to match. So I've got quite a good sort of archive of sort of pictures of Forest games and Forest away trips from that era. I'd actually stood in the old Trent End that day. It wasn't where I'd normally had a seat in the what's now the Brian Clough stand and was back then still known as the executive stand. But that game was potentially going to be the last time anyone would get to stand in the old Trent End, because there were the club had announced plans to bulldoze it in the summer to build a new stand, which of course they did eventually do. The fact that they got relegated, it kind of delayed those plans for a year. So actually, I could have just sat in a normal seat and still had the opportunity to enjoy the Trent End. But yeah, I was in the Trent End that day, and after the full-time whistle and everybody, all the players had gone in, and everybody in the middle of the Trent End in that sort of central pen just stayed behind. And I think there was this idea that Brian Clough might come out and there might be a chance to sort of, bid him farewell again. And yeah, probably about 20 minutes after full time, most of the rest of the ground was empty. I don't know if he'd been told that there were people who were refusing to leave until he kind of showed himself. But yeah, he just sort of came walking out of the tunnel on his own, obviously in his famous green sweatshirt. And that was it. Everyone just sort of, there was only going to be one outcome to that. Everyone just piled on the pitch. And it's the same. I was there with my brother and a couple of our friends. And we got quite near to him before he was just almost sort of swallowed up in this sea of people.
Now being surrounded by not only photographers and policemen, but also supporters who are almost scrambling to get over the terracing there to get and touch their hero.
Yeah, it was really emotional. And, for me, I was a teenager at the time, and Brian Clough as Forest manager was all I'd known. And anyone sort of my age will say the same. He was so much more than just Forest manager. He was just this iconic figure in our city. And this idea that he wasn't going to be Forest manager anymore was just mind-blowing, really. It was hard to imagine where Forest were going to go without him, really. So, yeah, a really sad, bittersweet day. You look back at some of the grief Arsene Wenger got off Arsenal fans when he had the audacity to only manage to finish fourth or fifth. Having achieved such wonderful things with Arsenal in his time there, and yet you've got Forest fans who were sort of almost forgiving a manager of relegation out of sheer love for what he'd done in his 18 years. It was incredible, really.
Special memories from Rich Fisher there, who also reflects on the Cloughie years in his brilliant book, The Church of Stuart Pearce. And if you'd like to share your memories of Brian Clough anytime, feel free to email youngman@brianclough.com or send a message on the Facebook page, Brian Howard Clough. And talking of Facebook, it was really great to receive a message from Ipswich Town fan Jeff Poole. He got in touch because he says he had the privilege of seeing Brian Clough's last league game as manager. He said there was a carnival atmosphere back on the afternoon in May 1993, but there was a real sense of occasion too. He says when the team coach arrived at the Ipswich ground, Cloughie was absolutely mobbed. And come to think of it, there's a great photo of Cloughie on the steps of the bus with loads of fans wishing him well. Jeff goes on to recall that there was a lot of respect between both sets of supporters that day, and the police presented him with a cake. That's Cloughie, not Jeff. I remember that the Ipswich manager John Lyall presented Cloughie with a silver salver as well. That's one of the memories I've included in my best-selling book, Brian Clough, 50 Defining Fixtures, which you can buy with a discount on the website, and I'll personally sign it to you as well. Jeff signs off by saying he'll always be an admirer of Brian Clough and describes his interviews as fascinating, always interesting, and often entertaining. He talked so much sense, he says. I think we'll all agree with that. And he says he would love to have met and spent time with Brian, and he sends his thanks for helping to keep Brian Clough's memory alive. Well, it was great to hear from Jeff, and if you have any Cloughie memories you'd like to share, then just send me an email. The address is youngman@brianclough.com.
All this business about they played with fear, frightened of me, what a load of rubbish. The only time they were frightened of me if they went to bed too early on a Thursday or Friday and I had to get them out to have a glass of champagne.
Now, someone else who has special memories of Cloughie's farewell to football management is Chris Ellis. He was invited into Brian's office after his final match at the City Ground. Chris, who now works as a journalist, told me what happened.
Yes, his final game. And we remember how important Brian Clough even thought reserve games were, which I don't know whether it's kind of fitting that his final game as a Forest manager with Forest involvement was a reserve game. Really can't remember who they played at home. I think it was the Tuesday or the Wednesday after that final game at Ipswich, and there was a reserve game. I can't remember whether it was always in my plans or my mum or dad's plans to do what happened. But all I remember is going to the game. I had no idea who Forest played, the reserves, or if they won. But after the game, we stood around and waited for Brian Clough outside the ground. So we were outside the main stand in the car park. Now, at the time, his office looked onto the car park, but the windows were really high. So, there was light, obviously, that went into his office, but you couldn't see. There was a group of us, I think about 6 or 7, of which I was probably the youngest. I was at senior school by then, so 14, 15. Anyway, so we waited and we waited and we waited. And even one of the people who was waiting had a ladder, and he put the ladder against the wall of the office of the main stand that looked out and looked in. And he went, yeah, Clough is in there. There's a few other people in there as well. Oh. I don't know whether anyone saw him. He came down. I remember somehow someone from the club was aware we were there and said, Brian is aware that you're here. And I feel like we waited 2 hours. Could have been more, could have been less. It feels like 2 hours. And suddenly a side door opened and there we were allowed in. There was some people who I feel like I should remember, a journalist, and I can't think right now remember who, but there was a handful of people in his office. I don't know, 5 or 6. They'd clearly been having a drink on his final game. And he was lovely. He kissed us all on the cheek. He allowed us to have a picture, which, as you can understand, is very proudly in my possession. But yeah, there's me and Brian Clough with my pinstripe Forest shirt, because that was the pinstripes in the year that we went down. Yeah. And we were probably in there no more than 10 minutes. He gave us a few minutes of time, and then just before we left, he said it was great. And I don't know whether it was my cap or someone else's, because I think in the picture I could be wearing a cap. He said, I'm going to try and chuck this cap onto this clothes peg. He'd got like a circular clothes peg in the office. So we had a couple of attempts at that, and on his second time, he got the hat on the peg, and not long after that we were ushered out. And of course, it wasn't in the days of instant photos on your phone or whatever. And I remember, I think my mum had been home, got the camera, she'd come back. So she joined us to wait. She took the picture. And I even think, because obviously in those days, you paid $3.99 for 4-day photography to get it. I mean, look at that, crazy. $3.99 to wait 4 days for your photo. But I think she paid for the 1 hour photo. And she actually came into school came in on the lunch break and had the photos developed already and showed me the photo, which obviously we then got blown up and it's framed. It's a treasured possession.
Well, thanks to Chris and Rich for their memories, and of course many thanks to you for listening. There are more stories on the tribute website brianclough.com, and you can see the photo that Rich took of Brian on the pitch at his last league home match.
It was just an outpouring of emotion for people wanting to show Brian Clough what he meant to them.
And suddenly a side door opened and there we were allowed in. And he was lovely. He kissed us all on the cheek.
I hope you can join me next time for more memories of the great man in the green jumper.